everyone, and welcome to Fire and Forte, and welcome to Sherika, who have I pronounced your name correctly?
You did. Thank you, Hannah.
Now, it is the crack of dawn where Sherika is, and the end of the day for me. So, where are you calling in from today?
I am calling in from Atlanta, Georgia, in the United States.
And it's still dark, right?
The sun is rising. So it is 7 a.m., but I'm excited to be here with you.
Amazing. It's so, I'm really honored that you got up this early and you're so perky, like clearly a morning person. So that's great. I'm holding on in there because I'm not a night person. Now, let me introduce you to our audience. It's just incredible to be talking to Sherika today. I have been stalking her slightly because Sherika is an HR leader and executive who really specializes in diversity and inclusion. Now, we talk a lot about the need for women representation, much more broader representation in technology, in leadership. And I know day to day, I'm party to those conversations. But I'm not in the room where decisions happen and change can be made, whereas Sherika has actually implemented strategies and policies in businesses such as Google, Anaplan, other companies in Silicon Valley. I mean, you just don't get more close to the action and driving change than that. And I'm going to read a quote that I found from one of your colleagues, which I think for me epitomizes why I needed to get you on Fire on Forte. When I see Sherika in the ring fighting for diversity, inclusion, equity, and belonging, I know real change is really happening.
Oh,
wow.
wow.
Wow, that's what one of your colleagues said. And that says a lot, doesn't it? Because there's fighting for it, and then there's actually creating the change, and then there's maintaining the change, which I know that you've got a really fantastic history of. So thank you for joining us. And I want to say as well, a huge congratulations on turning 40, the best age ever, and starting your career break.
Thank you so much, Hannah. This is great. And can I just say about that quote that you just read, thank you for sharing that with me. I don't know where you got that from, but I will tell you, I often move so fast that I don't take time to like smell the flowers that are given to me or acknowledge, some of the work that I'm able to participate in. So thank you.
Well, good. I'm glad we could acknowledge that. And maybe that is something to put on the to-do list for the career break, to have a look at some of these accolades that are out there.
That's fair. Yes, will do.
So you've had a stunning career and you've now taken a career break. John?
I can honestly say that I have been working since I was 15 years old and 9 months to be exact. I grew up in the Washington, D.C. area, and in D.C., you can start working at age 15. And I did, right? I started my first job was in a church bookstore because I spent so much time at church. But quite honestly, I was a young mother and had my oldest daughter my senior year of high school. And so I often had to work 2 or 3 jobs to maintain our lifestyle, to provide, the necessities and the desires of her heart. So I've been working a long time, but, when I went to college, I thought I wanted to be a nurse because my aunt is the nurse. And at the sight of blood, I almost fainted. So I said, no, that's not it. So I ended up going to Howard University and studying business. And while there, there was a big emphasis and focus on the financial industry and on Wall Street. And particularly because Howard is the premier historically Black college and university in the States. And Wall Street consistently needs more representation of Black and brown people. There was a push for us to go to banking, and I did. So I started my career at JP Morgan Chase as, a financial analyst, and did that for a couple of years, but realized that you needed like more education and more experience and mentors to kind of move from back office tech and operations to the front office of like trading and investing and all of that. And so I actually took a break then. I'm now realizing this in real time. I quit my job, my full-time job that was providing for my daughter and I, and went back to school to get my MBA full-time. And that was the first time that I had taken a break and taken a leap of faith in myself to say, even if you leave the workforce, you will, land better than when you left. And that indeed was the fact, because the break allowed me to study at university and really focus, but also explore new companies and new functional areas like economic consulting and human capital, which is what I went into when I graduated with my MBA. So I started focusing on HR and HR consulting, but did it for the federal government for 10 years. And, people ask, well, why would you go from banking to government? Like, they don't seem to mesh well. But quite honestly, I was on a journey to gain more leadership experience. And in the US, the federal government had and still has an aging workforce. And so they have a desire for strong leaders. And there, my leadership was cultivated and grown in a way that I think helped accelerate my career. So I went to government. I'm still in the financial space. So I worked for a CFO and really handled many of their HR type of operations, and then went over to lead talent acquisition at a financial regulatory agency. So still had this finance background, but then focused on people. And then got an opportunity to work at the White House. And who says no to the White House? You just don't do it. And, the opportunity there was to lead a small technical agency that was started by President Obama called the United States Digital Service. And that was no more than 250 cool geeks from around the country that were really there on short-term appointments to really help modernize and digitize government. And got the opportunity I came in to lead the function, like all of their talent management. And, through succession planning and others, I got an opportunity to lead the entire organization, and it was so rewarding. But one of the things I will tell you is that through that journey, I met a number of people who were at Silicon Valley companies like Google and Twitter and Facebook. And it was there that I discovered the true gap in representation, quite honestly, because a lot of people at USDS were white men. They were white men. And here I am, a Black woman, really trying to find my place. And one of the projects that I was working on was to try to really create a workforce profile for our company. And it had me digging and looking and seeking to get guidance from some of these larger companies. And what I found was abysmal. Like the representation numbers were awful. And so I really set out on a journey to really go to one of the most powerful companies, be it Google at the time, to really see what they were doing around diversity, equity, and inclusion. And so that led me to Tech in the Valley. I actually took a bet on myself and moved my entire family from the Washington, D.C. area over to Silicon Valley. And it was one of the best experiences of our lives. So, from there, I kind of, went to Anaplan, and there leads me to this break. So, I say all of that. Those are the main 9-to-5 jobs, but I will tell you, I always had a 5-to-9 job too, up until I was age 30. So from 15 to 30, I worked at least 2 jobs. And some of those second jobs were like the bookstore or an adjunct professor at a community college, Prince George's Community College. I taught math for 3 years. Bloomingdale's, right? I like to shop. I like a little retail therapy. So when I was in college, I worked at, Bloomingdale's selling coffee machines and things like that. So I've always had this, this hustle about myself, and held down multiple jobs. And, as my career progressed and I got more senior in my roles, I couldn't do those other things. I really had to focus because my job required much more than a 9-to-5 commitment. But turning 40, having served as the inaugural Chief Diversity Officer of Anaplan, global lead of diversity and inclusion at Google, and a number of other key roles, now is the time for me to kind of sit back and take a break, because burnout is real. And none of those jobs came easy. They all came with a lot of exploration and courage, quite honestly, because like the quote that you read, I'm on the front lines and I'm constantly fighting and advocating for change. And it's exhausting.
I can appreciate that because it's so needed and you were doing such a good job at it. But I look at things like International Women's Day, and these are events that, you know, you'd be talking at. And I know that you talked at the Consumer Electronics show as well. And there's probably just, even just the talking commitments which are on top of a day-to-day job, that's you're being asked to represent quite a lot, let alone the day-to-day job. And yeah, so I can really appreciate the burnout. It's something that the industry needs so much, but you're only one person and you do have to look after yourself. So you've gone from a lot of hustle, 2 jobs, very senior jobs, to now probably trying to stop and trying to work out how you actually do stop, because you've never stopped from the age of 15.
Yep.
But there's a huge theme here of betting on yourself. When we look back over your life, really, that moment of going into JP Morgan, but also taking that first break for an MBA. I mean, you say it now because it's easier when you look back, isn't it, to know it was the right thing, but a really big leap as a mum, and then doing that, moving your family later down the line. Is there a common thread there of big moments of growth that you've had, or moments of confidence, like that moment just before you make that decision? Do you just kind of think, screw it, let's do it? Or do you think about it a lot and kind of put a lot of pressure on yourself?
Right before I take a big leap, there's a lot of questioning that comes from family and friends. Why would you do that? Like, you know, when I left JP Morgan, in what world would I leave a good paying job? And at this point, that JP Morgan had moved me from DC to Delaware, from Delaware back to DC, right? Like, this was a company that was investing in me. And I just said, this isn't right. And I remember the head of the office at the time begged me to stay and said, I will pay for you to go to Georgetown to get your MBA. Wow. If you stay and get it part-time. And $100,000 later, right, in student loans, that would have been a nice thing, but that wasn't the right thing for me. So, you know, I think back, and yes, there is this common thread of betting on myself, but there's this thought of, there's probably, you know, a couple of weeks of contemplation and fear that I have to work through. And one of the things that I think I have been doing now, and probably even back then, that have helped me get through the fear, is like just finding some isolating time for myself. And I don't get that often with, you know, a husband and 3 kids and the job and community organizations. But I've tried to reclaim that time now with going on walks for at least an hour in the mornings that give me headspace to really think about what I want and how I want it. But yes, I often think of the reward, not the risk, because there's a risk to leave your job. There's a risk to move across country. There's a risk to take a career break. But I often think about what I can gain if I just take that leap.
And there's evidence now as well. I do think that that's a beauty of hitting 40. Hence why I don't think I'm joking anymore, that I do believe this is the best age ever, if only we knew, where you've got the evidence now that you've done those leaps before, and boy, have they paid back. The role that you did at the White House, phenomenal experience. That's amazing. I wonder what it was like for you being in the minority and seeing a massive need to increase representation, but it's quite hard when you haven't got some colleagues that are the same as you. And that's something that I've talked to people about being a female in tech. Are you a bit on your own? And actually, you know, what's that really like? Can you do it for a bit and then in the end you kind of think, I'd like some company, please?
Yeah, right. That's exactly right. It is a lonely feeling. I mean, you know, women in technical positions the representation there is much lower than women overall. But I will tell you, while at USDS, I was in great company. So while there weren't many women, actually, I take that back. While at USDS, one of the things that I was actually really proud of is that 60% of our leadership team were women. I've never worked anywhere else where it's been that way. And one could say it was because we were small, and no, it was because the leadership team there was intentional, right? Like we were intentional about having our head of product, our head of UX design, right? And then when it came down to filling a new director of engineering position, while that was a man, it was a Black man, right? While I was there. And so that, again, these are like revolutionary placements and opportunities, but I was in good company. And so then when I got to Google, representation had risen over the years, but being in the Bay Area, not so much, not for Black and Latina representation. So I will tell you, it does get lonely, but if you are in a place where you have financial and human resources, where you have support from your leadership team, it feels less of a fight. It feels less like a fight than it does just like a BHAG, right? Like a big, hairy, audacious goal. And so that's how I looked at it over time, which is, how can I get from point A to point B, and who can I bring along the way to help me? And so I had great helpmates at USDS. So I'm really thankful for that. And that actually began fueling the momentum that I needed and that I continue to have today to fight and advocate for proper representation, not just in racial and gender representation, but also at varying levels throughout the organization. Because some people in some companies will diversify its workforce by adding more women or people of color or LGBTQ plus employees or whatever the diversity that's lacking is, but they'll all be at the lower levels. You rarely see them ascend to middle and senior management. And so for me, what I do is look at the top of the company to see who is representing and making the decisions at the top. And that gives employees an opportunity to say, if that person can do it, I can too. And so that's what drives me, and that's what keeps me going.
And the job would never end then, would it? I could see that, but it's a really motivating goal. One of my first guests was a woman who worked in hospitality and then worked in customer experience. And she told me about her frustration of manels, that in the hospitality industry, it was majority females until you got to leadership, when it was all guys. That's and right. She would be the only female on just manel after manel of male panels, and she went on a complete mission to do a very similar thing, to say you're not representing the core workforce, which was female. But it's a long journey, isn't it, to actually achieve that. I think it's a great point what you make about finding these. It sounds as though your support network in the leadership team or in your colleagues. So when you're at the government organisation, you were finding allies. So you had that support. Yep. So that you weren't on your own. Is there some kind of advice and guidance that you could give to other people that are in a role where they do need to take on some kind of transformation, that way that you achieved that?
Well, let me just say this. Especially when you're the only, you do have to identify allies very quickly. I had lunch with a friend yesterday, and we were talking about the representation at her company, and she's in healthcare. She's like, Sherika, 90% of our, entry-level workforce are Black women, and 75% of middle management or above are white men. There's no progression up, and this is in healthcare. And one of the things that, and she's like, I'm sick of it. I have to see the change, and I need to be a part of the change. And she's a white woman, and she says, when you have to identify allies in the process. Well, let me go back to the example you shared there, a manel. I didn't know what you were talking about, a man panel. Got it. Let me tell you what our director at USDS did at the time, and all of our male leaders. These guys were from Twitter, Facebook, Google, and so you can imagine they got a ton of requests to speak. However, every time they got a request to speak, they would ask the composition of the rest of the panel. They would not agree until they understood the composition of the rest of the panel. They would often decline, and if the requester insisted, they said, I will come, but I'm also bringing Sherika. I will come, but I'm also bringing Hannah. They would come, but would bring a member of the historically underrepresented group in tech to show their allyship in action, but also to help diversify the panel. I mean, that is allyship at its best.
The phrase allyship in action is a great one. It can so easily just be a word that's bandied around, can't it? But actually put your money where your mouth is. Let's actually see the difference. So so it's like taking a +1, isn't it? You know, being invited to a party and taking a +1 whether one's invited or not. So yeah. That's a really great suggestion then, isn't it? So and I suppose it's questioning those moments that come quite normally, that are so standard for a leader to be invited to or represent, to think, is this my place? And actually taking a moment to actually think, how do I share those moments? It sounds like.
How do you share? And can I just say this, and this is a bit aside, but it is a point that I want to come back to. The break that I'm taking now allowed for the person that I hired who came behind me to step up. And I talk to her at least once a week. And she is afraid, but she's doing it afraid. And I am so proud of her. And I often say, if I was there, you wouldn't have gotten that opportunity. This is your time. Your time is now. So as I think about allyship in action, allyship is a verb. It is not a noun. And in this case, I was creating opportunities for a woman that I was mentoring along the way. And to see her in the seat, to be a part of the senior leadership team now, to be going to these meetings. Even now, she's like, hey, I have a speaking opportunity for you. It will be great. I was like, nope, it is great for you. I can speak all day, no problem, but it's great for her too. And I think there are opportunities where we get to pass the gems along that we've learned. And my goal during this break is to find those mentorship opportunities so that I can continue to have impact, because I'm driven by impact. Like my next job has to be impactful, period, point blank. Yeah, money's great, title's great, like all that, but impact is what drives me. And so during this break, I'm again, this is revolutionary for me. So thank you for having me think out loud. Mentorship and having that impact is something that I'm looking forward to as well.
I think because you've experienced it personally, I'm wondering if you've had these amazing supporters that have given you these opportunities, you're naturally paying it forward by the sounds of it. And I think it's a really positive invitation that anyone listening could also do, because again, when I turned 40, I realized how thankful I was for all the people that got me to where I was today, which is more just happy and healthy, to be honest. And I think if you can do that in your career, you're the lady that you mentored, wow, she must value that so much, because you've seen her grow, you've seen her potential, and then you've actually paid it forward. I mean, and then she will do that again, surely.
Yes. I think there's so much power in mentorship and more importantly, sponsorship. And I talk about it a lot. But when people can call your name in a room that you're not in and that you will likely never occupy, it is so powerful. And so I often tell people, ask for what you want, because once you express verbally what it is that you want, then people can really align their resources. I often say, I'm not your ally if I'm not able to use my social capital to help you. That's what this is. Like, what social capital have I built up with somebody else or in some organization or something that I can use to now help you get to where you are? Because that's how I've gotten to where I am. So yeah, it's a very rewarding feeling.
And have you had female role models along the way, as well as, have you had mentors yourself?
I mean, wow. Can I just say, so, back when I was a teenager in church, I spent a lot of time in church. They paired us up with a mentor when I was like probably 15, right? And I was paired with this woman named Vicki Robinson because she was an attorney and I wanted to be an attorney. And so they were trying to do some functional matches. I am not an attorney. once I got to business school, I realized that I didn't like law because it is everything except this, if only that, not then, that kind of um, exception thinking. But, and I'm more of a black and white type of person, but the relationship that we developed over time has been amazing. And the relationship is 25 years old. And I've watched her get married, have kids, and she's watched me do the same. And I just think she's in tech now, right? She's at Microsoft, right? And I'm in tech too. And that came full circle. She was in government, I was in government. And I don't know that she's noticed that she probably has, right? That she had created this blueprint and path that I was following for some time. And maybe about 5 years ago, she mentioned to me, she's like, hey, I was mentoring you for so long, and now you're mentoring me, because now you're in tech before I am, and you're telling me how to navigate and get through certain things, right? And we don't do nearly the same job, but we were navigating the same industry. And I'm just so thankful for women like her that have been in my life for long periods of time, or women who I've only known for, let's say, the greater part of a year, like a woman named Susan Chapman, who I was introduced to through one of my best friends. And Susan was a former executive at Amex, right? Really senior woman. And the very first time I met her, I was in tears because she was speaking my language as a senior Black woman in the financial space. She's like, it's hard. Here's what I'm dealing with. Here's what you need to do. And here's what you should be thinking about 90 days from now. And that advice that I get from Susan, I don't have to talk to her once a month. I can pick up the phone right now, anytime, day or night, and talk with her. And we can share stories about work, about motherhood, about community organizations, whatever it is. So I value those relationships, and I vow to be that person for someone else too.
Well, it makes me think that there's often do you want to be my mentor? Second of all, it made me think there's often an impression that you have to wear a mask at work, and again, one of my previous guests actually was a CFO who said, you are in a fishbowl and you do need to realize that you're being watched, because it's very important that you instill confidence in people. And she was honest about that. That does mean sometimes getting out of the lift and taking a deep breath and putting your face on a little bit. I wondered what you could talk about that when you're in the C-suite, you've got some really big days, but you're very visible in an organization. How do you manage that, and what happens on a bad day?
I mean, it almost feels like you don't get to have a bad day. There were long days, right? Like I would fly from Atlanta to the Bay Area, go to work, go to the board meeting, go to dinner, come back, try to talk to my husband and children, and then kind of rinse and repeat. And there are days that you just don't feel like it. Or furthermore, I have some health challenges. There are things like stress that exacerbate, right, some of the health challenges. And there are days where you just don't want to put on the face, or you don't want to do it. And I will say, I had to find at least one, maybe two people that I could confide in, where I could just be myself. And oftentimes those people are people that have watched you ascend. One of the things that I have been blessed to experience in my career is going in at one level and being promoted to the next. And that too is a trend. As I'm saying this out loud, this is crazy. The same thing happened. I mean, so it's a blessing and a curse. You go in as a peer and then you take over the team. That is not easy, especially when you're young. I'm young to be in this space. One of the things I realized is a lot of my C-suite colleagues are 50 plus, and they're not mining 7 and 9-year-old children, elementary age children. So their kids are either off to college or in high school or at a different phase in life. Meanwhile, my first grader needs me at a different point. So, a part of what I'm doing now is exploring whether I want to go back into the C-suite, because it's something you have to think about. I'm like, do I do it now or do I do it later? Because there are things that are pulling me away from home. And so back to your original, question about, this mask that you wear. It's real. And I think I have extra pressure on my shoulders because I am a first generation college student. My mother and father did not go to college. So I don't have them to ask about the unwritten rules of corporate America. They cannot help me, which is why I've invested in this relationship with Vicky and others. You know, I was one of two Black leaders on Anaplan's leadership team. So there was at least one other person, but I will tell you that helped me make my decision to join. Because I said, okay, they actually value, you know, thoughts and experiences of another culturally aware and other Black leader. And I tell Victor Barnes all the time, I said, Victor, had you not been on my interview slate, they actually made sure that he interviewed me. He had nothing to do with my job, but that was intentional. And let me tell you, that decision came as a result of influence from the Black Employee Resource Group. So the Black Employee Resource Group said, hey, we're hiring for this inaugural Chief Diversity Officer. We have one Black senior C-suite level official. We want to make sure that he is on the interview slate. And so anyway, having those allies there really helped. And so I would often confide in Victor, and I will tell you, Victor has since left the company, and so have I, and we still get together for coffee every month. He sits in Atlanta. So I had the benefit of having someone here, but again, that relationship helped me. And so, look, there will be days that I would go in the bathroom and cry, but guess what? You you get out, you put your makeup back on, and you walk out. You know, there will be I had some rough days, but I think they all came to make me stronger. And one of the things that I started doing was journaling. I am sitting here with 3 different journals or notebooks because I wanted to capture what was happening, because as much as I can type it and make everything digital, there's something for me that comes to me and that I embody when I actually physically write it out. So actually through this interview, I've been writing down a couple of things because there are really key points that are coming to me, very salient points that I want to make sure I don't forget.
There's going to be a memoir, I think, that's going to come out of this career break.
Listen, I want to write a book. I'm not shy about it. In fact, I wanted to write a book and present it at my 40th birthday party. But then I got the opportunity to serve as the CHRO, and that took much more capacity than I ever thought and had. And so I didn't have the time to do both. I wanted to do it so badly that I've already paid to do some of the work on the book, so that it ensures that I'm going to do it. So while I'm on this break, I like this title, Bet on Yourself, because I think that that's something that I can really, really talk about and talk through.
I can't wait. I mean, I feel as though I've got an author exclusive. So we'll be back here in 6 months talking to you as an author. I read, I think yesterday, that the YouTube CEO is taking
Susan. Yes.
You might even know her then.
I've met her. I've met Susan, and I worked really, really closely with her. Actually, the head of DEI, Stephen was the head of DEI for Susan for 6 years. Him and I were really close, and he was one of the people that brought me into Google when I started.
It's actually quite a small world then, is it? That you can be
Very
so closely connected. And
yep.
it does make me think with the Jacinda Ardern as well, New Zealand Prime Minister resigning. And I think that there's been these write-ups linking those two about the pressure of senior roles and whether it's any harder for women, and whether it's the emotional draw of, hang on, I've got a family, or all of these other things that you talked about, the amount of travel and different hats that you're wearing. Is there a way that women could get into leadership and not get so disillusioned? Perhaps, I know it doesn't always happen, but certainly exhausted, that they need to take a break. Is there another solution in your mind?
Let me tell you something. So when I took on the CHRO role, I was so blessed to have 3 friends that I could call at any time who were also CHROs at the same time, 2 men and 1 woman. So now if you think about this group, there are two women CHROs, 2 men. And we would, talk about different stories and things and how to handle it and, best practices and all the things. But what I got more from any of those conversations were the approaches to the problems were just so different. And yes, industry plays a role, experience plays a role, but gender actually plays a role. The men did not give a damn, right? Like, let me just say this. I would approach a problem, in my opinion, with much more empathy, much more, and then communicate with much more charisma and thought, and sometimes adding those layers on top of the solution would bode well, because it would land with the audience or the stakeholder or whoever I was dealing with very well, but they actually took more out of me. And so I could seemingly get less done because I'm expelling so much energy towards making sure that I say it right, or it's perfect, or, whatever it is. And I saw these elements of perfection the more I looked for it in women. I felt like there was more of a desire to make sure that if there were 10 items on the checklist in order to solve this problem, we needed to have 9 of the 10 before we could deliver the results or the solution. Meanwhile, the men were like, oh, hell, I got 6 or 7. I'm good. I'm going to do that and move on. And so I started to really think about this concept of having progress over perfection, so that I could actually get through my day more and really channel my energy in a way that would be much more productive. And that is something that came to me through a coach. She's like, look, your superpower is your energy. Like you got it. You light up a room, you do all these things, but you got to be careful on how you spend it. And that was a very revolutionary thought for me. And I think as women leaders, like really, really senior leaders in certain roles, yes, we have the pressures of managing work and home. Yes, we have the pressures of oftentimes being the first. And so the expectation for us is much, higher. But also, we have to get to the point where we are okay not being perfect. And I know I can't speak for Susan or other leaders, but for me, I need to really move beyond perfection and get to progress, so that I am seemingly tackling my to-do list with the right level of energy and not focusing too much on being perfect.
Very great insight, because you've got to find a solution to that, or you will focus on maybe the wrong things, or you'll end up getting burnout. And I wondered if there was any connection there to this term imposter syndrome, which in previous episodes I've said I'm banning that phrase because I just don't want to maybe acknowledge it. But one of my previous guests, again, she said that it actually does tend to happen with quite senior women, imposter syndrome. So that's quite interesting, that you're already succeeding, especially you've been recognized as succeeding, so therefore it actually gets harder. And maybe that is because we're not used to seeing our mums in senior positions, or maybe we haven't seen as many other women do it. I mean, yep. That's a whole spin-off conversation, I'm sure.
Yeah, but you know what? That goes back to something that I said at the CES talk. So you referenced this earlier, right? Every January, the Consumer Technology Association hosts the largest tech trade show in the world, and it's called the Consumer Electronics Show. And this year, I had the pleasure of speaking at the Female Quotient's Equity Lounge. And so it is a small place, very lavish, I must say, but that is curated experiences primarily for women, right? And we dine, we brunch, we laugh, we cry, we hear other women, we make connections. And I was speaking on a panel there, and I was talking about imposter syndrome and what it means. And you see women in the C-suite and you think, oh, she has it all together. Every time I see her, she's dressed nice, she's very polished, she does a presentation, she does all these things. And I said, when I got there, I first said to myself, how the hell do they do all this? Like, this is impossible. But what I didn't realize is that they have people that help them. So at a certain point in your career, like, you're still doing everything yourself. And when you have a team, you're kind of empowering your team to get the job done, and, they bubble the work up, so on and so forth. But one of the things I realized and I leaned into heavily was coaching. And so when I got to the C-suite, I had a coach, but then I got 2 because I needed one for different things. And so really, really just taking stock of what your new role is, what it requires of you, and then more importantly, what resources you need to be successful, was something that I had to really, consider. And then I had to ask for what I wanted. I had to say, in order for me to do this and be successful, I need somebody to help me with my communications. I need somebody to make sure that, they take care of my travel and all of my, all of the, I need somebody to do whatever it is. And so this notion of imposter syndrome is real. I experience it every day. And when I think about talking and speaking in front of others, people are like, oh, you're a natural. Yes, I've been talking since I was a little girl in church, right? We talk about this church thing, right? Like I've done that. And as a teen, I trained through Toastmasters. I've held several leadership positions in college and school. And so I would often have to get up and speak in front of groups. But every single time, and this interview is no exception, that I'm about to speak or share something, I have a pit in my stomach, because I don't know if the stories that I'm going to share are going to land, if the audience will resonate with what I'm saying, or if I'm just going to bomb. And so I think about what I have to do to build the confidence to get up here and have a conversation with you, Hannah, and the rest of this, wonderful audience, to really think through, how can I show up and just be my authentic self so that they can glean nuggets that I want to share with them, and then pull out some nuggets that I wasn't even thinking about sharing, but just happened to come out anyway.
So you move past that pit in the stomach and go for it. And
go for it.
Yeah. And then you get this, well, you've had the accolades before, I imagine, from the energy coming back, but it's like stage fright, I suppose, isn't it?
It is.
But then you get on the stage, and then it was a millisecond of stage fright, and then you're rewarded.
Yes. But I will tell you, there are a couple of things that make it better, right? Being on time. So when you're late, you're frantic. So like you have to be on time. I actually take pride. I'm like, I want to look this way. I want to feel this way. I want my shoes to be this way. Because when I look good, I feel good. And when I feel good, I perform well. And when I perform well, the message is received. And so for me, they're like a couple of little things that I'm like, okay, these things need to be in place, which is why I didn't go to the gym this morning at 5 o'clock, because it was going to make me frantic and frazzled. I didn't want to do that. So I just try to find these things over time that I have to pay attention to help me move past that pit in my stomach moment. But I also think of the impact that it'll have. Every time somebody asks me to do something, what I ask myself personally is, what impact will it have? And if the impact is greater than myself, then I normally say yes.
Very nice. That also helps you get out of yourself as well. Talk about getting out of your own head, thinking much more about the audience. Really amazing advice there. And again, I think this comes with experience. So I'm going to talk about the 40s, in not just for you, but also because your experience has clearly led you to where you are today, and the confidence and the momentum is really visceral. You're on form. And I think what I'm really hoping for as well, that women that listen to this just feel really empowered. And one of those things that I hope to see is that more women actually upskill themselves in tech, or in their career, or in their field, because especially in tech and with digital skills, every single job will need it, and we don't want to be left behind. I wonder, from your experience in tech, whether there's any advice or what you've maybe seen around proactively hiring people as they get a bit older, whether people can move into that career if they were in their 40s, or what they should be doing while in their current career to maybe upskill in that space.
Yeah, you know what? I often say, I feel like 40 is the perfect pivot point for me, because I made the revelation the other day, I have more years to work in front of me than I do behind me. Like, so if you think about it, I came out at 22, started working. So what's that? Roughly 18 years, give or take some internships or something. And I will be blessed to stop working at 58. Like, that's, most people, and I pray I don't fall in this bucket, but most people work until they're 60, 65, 67, whatever it is, especially in the Black community. Like, generational wealth is not, something that, that many of us have experienced. However, I will tell you that tech for me has been a game changer And it has allowed me to think about how to build generational wealth, not just for my children, but my grandchildren and those that come behind me. And the reason I say that is because even with, some of the entry-level jobs, some companies will allow employees to get what is called equity. And that equity is generally reserved for more senior leaders. But, at Google, right, at Facebook, and some of these other companies, like, you can be an admin and still get equity. And that equity is what is saved and grows over time, which will then create that generational wealth. So when I think about women and thinking about what they should do to kind of upskill themselves, I think the first thing is I would love to see more women in technical positions, right? And so I don't know that people understand that technical positions doesn't just mean engineering. There's so much more. And over time, I've watched the design, user experience, product management space grow in a way that has been organic and very beneficial for women. And so I would say, there are many women that think about project management and they can manage a project full cycle from end to end. Well, if you can be a project manager, think about what it takes to be a product manager, because they're not the same thing, but there are many transferable skills. And so I would encourage them to start looking at product management certificates, because that's like you're a CEO of your own little product. And I would say 6 out of the 10 skills translate. Right. So that's one area. I often find that people have creativity and design skills in a way that they've not used before. Think about being a UX researcher. That's a user experience researcher, asking questions, going out and looking at the audience and trying to figure out where they fit in. So these are 2 examples of just ways that you can find entry points into tech. And then also remember that every company pretty much has the same back office. They all need HR, they all need legal, they all need accounting, they all need some of these things. And some of these functions are outsourced to companies, but oftentimes they're also available in tech companies. And in a tech company, they may pay slightly more. So think about transitioning even some of your what we would call G&A functions to a tech company so that you have the opportunity to gain equity.
That's wonderful. It almost just takes some time of research and thinking and reflecting, doesn't it? Otherwise, you can label tech as being such an area that just isn't relevant to you. Actually, when you look at some of what the acronyms and the job titles mean, you realize that you're doing it already. It's just in a different space.
Yes. And I think, Hannah, you highlight the best point ever, which I have not mentioned yet. It is the same work, different language. Okay. So one of the things that I had to do in order to prepare to really enter this Silicon Valley space was really get very intentional about the words that I used, because there's like this language. And if you don't speak the language, they're like, oh, she doesn't know, she's not qualified. And that's not true. And so oftentimes in my mentorship and in my sponsorship, I take the time to help people translate their resume from one thing to the next, to help them prepare for the interview so that they're using the lingo that resonates with other tech execs or tech employees, so that they're seen as adjacent or their transferable skills are actually recognized. So that's one thing. And the way that you do that is by listening to podcasts. It's by reading articles, right? It's by going to the companies that you have on your list and figuring out what events they're sponsoring in the community, going to those events, meeting recruiters from that space, updating your LinkedIn to not only share where you are, but where you want to go, right? If you see, I am a project management seeking a position in the technology industry, like, you just have to ask for what you want. And you do that orally as well as in writing.
Fantastic advice. There's so many areas of experience that I imagine very new, more less established businesses would hugely benefit from your experience as well in all those different fields. So they might spot something that they want in your experience. You've got broad sales experience, for example, might be in a different field, but we need some of that in that
Yes.
space. Thank you. Well, I'm conscious of time and we've stolen your gym session, so I'm probably just going to end with a couple of last questions. One would be, where do you think, where might we see you in a year? What does success look like at the end of the career break?
I do not know, but much like you, Hannah, we're going abroad. So when my kids get out of school, at the end of May, and we're going away for a month, boom, outside of the US just to go and explore South America. So I'm really excited about that. I don't know. I will tell you my ultimate goal, and this is something that people saw in me as I was coming up through high school and college, because, I don't know if you all had this in the UK, like the superlatives where they say, oh, Sherika is most likely to succeed or most likely to be this. I got voted most likely to be CEO. I actually do want to be a CEO, but of a mission-driven organization, or an organization that helps the people. And so, I have this roadmap, and I say, oh, I got to have this job before this and that job before this. And I will tell you, just talking to a couple of people while on break already, people are like, you don't have to do all of that. You can go right to it. And so ultimately in a year, if I'm able to secure that CEO seat, I would love that.
I can see it happening. We've got 2 follow-ups that I've decided we're going to have the author meet in 6 months and 12 months as CEO.
Yes.
Especially making that impact as well. I think you've been absolutely gifted with a gift of knowing how to make that impact. So your story has inspired me so much. I cannot wait to share it. And I'm so glad that we've made contact, because you definitely are making the world a better place. And I think these 40s are going to be just the start of something much more. So there you go. I've given you a closing speech, but basically, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you so much, Hannah. This is absolutely amazing. And I thank you for creating this space for women who are on break and in their 40s. This is just the beginning. Cheers.
Yeah, fantastic. Watch this space. Thanks, Sherika. Take care.
All right, you too.